Good morning, everybody, and thank you so much for coming to our Accountability Mindset and Structures KBE work group. We're really excited to have this lovely month of May, 3 meetings to do all of this important work that we're going to do and discuss all of the amazing things that we're going to discuss. So before we get started, I want Meredith to do the roll call, and then we'll just do some introductions.
Amy Tracy.
Here.
Tom Thompson. Barry Taylor. Here. Claude Christian.
Here.
Reagan Satterwhite.
I'm here.
Jenny Larkins.
Here.
Tina Brogley. Apologize,
Here.
Tina.
That's okay.
Did I pronounce that correctly?
It's Brogle, but you got very
Brogle.
close.
Oh, okay. I will make a note. I'm sorry about that. Dara Savage.
Here.
Carla Tipton.
Here.
Sharon Robinson.
Here.
Steve Trimble.
Here.
Audrey Gilbert.
Here.
Melissa Jenkins. Zachary Clifton. Saw Zachary. Oh, yep.
Yeah, he's in the chat. Yeah.
Perfect. Michael Johnson. Oika Morse. Hey, Chair, you do have a quorum.
Right. So before we get started on our accountability mindset conversation for today, I want to go around and have everybody introduce themselves just a little bit since this is our first time meeting together. So I would like for everybody to say their name, their role today. So if you're coming here as someone from KDE, a KBE member, student, I think those are about the variety of roles, a teacher. Just state that. And then what city or county are you from? And what was the last book that you read? And it doesn't have to be the exact last book that you read. Whatever you want to say, if you just really enjoyed the book and you read it 3 years ago, that's totally cool too. So I will go first. I'm Audrey. I'm here today as your chair, but I'm also a student at Frankfurt High School. And I'm from Frankfurt High School, yeah. And the last book that I read was probably The Babysitter's Club. It was a selection of essays of reflection on people who read The Babysitter's Club in their childhood and how that shaped the people that they are today. So it was really interesting, but it also tied some books that I really enjoyed into it. So yeah, who wants to go next?
I'm Sharon Robinson. I'm Vice Chair of the State Board. I live in Jefferson County and represent that division on the State Board. I am really interested in this topic because I think the issue of documenting outcomes is an important function of what we do as a profession. And the last book that I read, or the book that came to mind when Audrey asked that question, is the book that was published about 3 years ago by Eddie Glad. It's called Begin Again. And it is reflections on the life of James Baldwin and our never-ending quest for improving the conditions of our democratic institutions. And I just felt like the phrase that I always remember is that while we can abdicate many things in our lives, responsibility for what we do is something that cannot be abdicated. So reflecting on our own responsibility and the results of our actions is, I think, integral to the work of this important work group.
Yes, I can go next. I'm Steve Trimble. I am a state board member, retired superintendent from Johnson County, where I reside here in Johnson County still. I am also a member of KDC, which is a co-op of superintendents, about 75 superintendents as a consultant. And I guess the last book I read was a leadership book about the elders of my church, and I'm looking forward to working with everyone with this very important assignment.
Anyone can go next. I'm looking at you, Thomas. You're on camera.
Oh, should I have my camera off? No, I'm Tom Thompson. I'm a division director in the Office of Career and Technical Education with the Kentucky Department of Education. Last book I read was Ratchetdemics. It was part of a book study on diversity and equity. And then we learned a lot, quite a bit about it and had some really good discussions in our office. One of my favorite books, though, is a leadership book. It's What Great Principals Do Differently, by Todd Whitaker. I just feel like it's got a lot of insight on growing instructional leaders, and that's me.
I'll go ahead, and then Audrey, maybe we could play popcorn after that. Everybody could pass it to somebody else. My name is Reagan Satterwhite. I'm also in the Office of Career and Technical Education. I'm the executive advisor for CTE. I am from Frankfort as well. Audrey and I are neighbors here in Frankfort. The last book I read was just for a fun read. It was on spring break. I read Daisy Jones and the Six. It is a great book. You may have heard of it because they've now created it for television. It's on Amazon Prime. It is loosely based off of Fleetwood Mac. So it's a great, easy, fun read. Would recommend it. I am going to pass it to, let's see, Elizabeth. Elizabeth's on here.
Oh, Elizabeth, me, Reagan? Okay, good morning, everyone.
We would like to see you.
It's like, yeah, I'm just trying to, I'm actually a part of the learning, excuse me, of the learning work group. So I'm just kind of like a bystander of this one. I'm just trying to get my feel of these meetings and seeing what's going on. But my name is Elizabeth Hack, and I work in the commissioner's office at KBE. Oh, I'm supposed to pass it on to somebody. I don't know who has gone or not gone. Let's see here, guys. Somebody step up here. How about Amy?
Who said that? Meredith?
I did, from the shadows. Yes, Amy, are you able to unmute?
I can barely hear you.
Amy, are you able to unmute and participate?
Yes.
Thank you so
Okay.
much.
Thank you.
I'm Amy Tracy. I'm with the Office of Career and Tech Ed as well. I live in Lincoln County, and I guess the last book I read was probably nothing related to work. It was Suspects by Danielle Steele. And let's go. What about Mary?
Thanks, Tracy. Good morning. My name is Mary Taylor, and I am also with the Office of Career and Technical Education. As you can see, accountability is a pretty important topic to our office. I live in Bardstown, Kentucky, and the last book that what I do for the department is I am a business and industry liaison for the Office of Career and Technical Education, so I can bring the business and industry voice. And the last book that I read was I Know Why the Crawdad Sings. I probably butchered that title, but it's a movie too. Tina, I will pass it off to you.
Thanks, Mary. Hi, my name is Tina Brogle. I'm also with the Office of Career and Technical Education. So, this is a really important topic for us, and I'm glad to see us out in force. I work with work-based learning with Mary, and so that will be my purpose here is the direction of work-based learning and its obvious connection with what we're trying to do. I live in Garrett County, and that's where I work from my home office. And the last book I read was The House Girl from Tara Conklin, and it was wonderful. Highly recommended. It was a book club book. So I'm going to popcorn this off to Carla.
Morning, everyone. My name is Carla Tipton. I'm from CTE as well. I'm the branch manager of the data investment branch. So, and we oversee Perkins. So accountability is a big part of Perkins. The last book that I will admit to reading, because sometimes I read some of that slutty stuff, you know. So the last book that I will admit to reading is Educated by Tara Westover. It was a very interesting book. This was a woman that had absolutely, until she was in college, there was no record of her anywhere. She did not even have a birth certificate. So, and she got her doctorate. She got 2 doctorates, one from Harvard, and she also studied in England. So it was a very, very interesting book. And I will pass this off to Claude.
Of course you will, Carla. Thank you. Good morning, everybody. My name is Claude Christian. I am the TEDS coordinator for the state, which is the statewide database that keeps track of all the accountability information for CTE students. The last book I read, or I'm reading again because I'm an avid Stephen King nut, is Night Shift, which is a series of short stories. And I'm going back over that one simply because of the release of the new movie Boogeyman. And they've amazingly made a 2-hour movie out of a 12-page story. But that's what happens when you deal with Stephen King, and looking forward to it simply because the first viewing of the movie, they had to cut out a scene because the first time they showed the character that was going to be the boogeyman, the people got so excited and screamed and everything that they couldn't hear necessary dialogue. So they had to cut a piece of the movie so people would actually know what the heck was going on. That's kind of the way Stephen King operates, and I'm looking forward to it.
Thank you. I think we have,
yeah,
Shara, I think.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Shara Savage in the Office of Assessment and Accountability. I manage the the ACT, and I do help with the post-secondary readiness part of the accountability, that indicator. I live here in Georgetown, Scott County, and the last book I read for pleasure, not for work, was the life and love story of George and Martha Washington. So I'm a little bit of a history nut. So that's me. And so I will turn this over to my good colleague, Jenny Larkins.
Thanks, Shara. Hi, I'm Jenny Larkins. I'm a program manager in the Office of Assessment and Accountability. I've been with KBE since 2016. The last book I read was Abundant Simplicity, and it's all about living intentionally, about ridding your life of things that don't allow you to be a blessing to others, basically. And I also, like Shara, live here in Georgetown, Scott County, Kentucky. And I will pass it over to who's left? Meredith?
Hello, I'm here as support. So my name is Meredith Brewer. I'm the Director of Education Policy. Well, let's see. The one that comes to mind is A Gentleman in Moscow, but I know I've read others since then, but that's the one that will come up at the moment. I think we have Zachary in the chat, who is our student representative, and I do want to share that he wrote that he is a junior at Corbin High School and that he recently read Fahrenheit 451 and The Age of AI. So those are 2 great books that he put in the chat. I think that we need to hear from Dr. Rupp, Audrey, and then that might be the whole group.
I think that's it. Yeah.
Hey, good morning, everyone. My name is Andre Rupp. I'm the chair of the KBE Working Group on Assessment that is meeting tomorrow. And I wanted to listen in and see what you're talking about today so that I have context for tomorrow and help my group shape its work. My background is educational measurement, testing, research methodology, district work, all of that together. And I get my education through theater a lot. So the last show that I've seen is the wonderful Jodie Comer in a relatively complicated but very intense, wonderful one-woman play called Prima Facie that's currently on Broadway.
Very nice. So thank you everybody for sharing that. I think it's important for us to get to know each other in order to have, open, honest conversations about accountability. So without further ado, we will dive right into talking about mindsets. That's our focus for today. Next week, we'll talk about structures. So today we can stay away from anything technical like that and just talk about what our ideal mindset is, how we need to get there, those kinds of things. So we can really take this in whatever direction we want to, especially based off of the readings that we did and anything else that you all have done as pre-work. But the first question I want to ask is, when you think of accountability, what comes to mind? Just what are some thoughts, feelings, words, anything that comes to mind for you?
Well, I think I kind of suggested what comes to mind in my introduction, outcomes. What did we actually do? And how do we document those results in a way that supports further reflection and consideration of next steps? I mean, accountability for me is not an end game. It is a key strategy of the game that we're in, and the continuous improvement results, continuous improvement on those results are really part of the same coin. So my mindset is, how do we take an honest look at what we've done, the impact of what we've done, and how do we structure, articulate, and support the next steps required to improve on that outcome, no matter what it was.
I really like that. Yeah, continually improving on that. Just taking it and seeing those next steps. I really like that. It's not the one and done step. Yeah. I will say for me, when I think of accountability, I think of reciprocity. I guess it's more my ideal accountability than anything. What it looks like for me to be accountable to my teachers to be accountable to me, my school to be accountable to my teachers and to me, my school to be accountable to the community to be accountable to all of us. So that's really what I think of when I think of accountability. When I'm doing my work at school, that's what drives me. Those are the things that I think about when I sit and I take the state test. When I sit and I finish a final, when I do a paper, that's what I think about. The why I'm doing that is because we're all working together and it's my responsibility in that reciprocal relationship to do my best work so that others will equally contribute. So I saw Steve Trimble, you came off camera and I think I interrupted you. So you go on.
No, you didn't really interrupt me. I accidentally went on camera, but didn't really need anything. But I think that we should be able to use accountability to find the identity of the greatest needs for the students. Use this accountability to find out what can we do to help them be better. And so many times in the past, it's always about rankings, and everybody's more concerned about teaching tests instead of teaching kids what they need to know. And I think we can find some way to get away from that. I don't know if there is a way to get away from that. No matter what you do, it seems like somebody's out there trying to rank the schools one place or another. And sometimes the rankings don't always fit what the job the school districts are doing. And so let's do for kids instead of worrying about what the adults have done.
Very student-centered. I like that. And I see Dr. Robinson's applause there. I agree. And in the chat, we have measures of progress from Tom and growth from Zach. So all very good points. Anyone else? Jenny put equity in the chat. I think that's really important as we discuss mindsets, how we can shift to an equity focus in accountability and what that would look like for us. Very important.
Jenny, would you be willing to speak a little bit more about that comment?
Sure. I think one of the main reasons that we have accountability is to make sure that every student gets what they need. You know, we of course learn how the schools are doing and so forth, but you know, part of what we show in accountability is the performance of the different student demographic groups. And, you know, without accountability, it's possible that students would be left behind, I guess. So.
Yeah, and I think to follow up on, I'll let Claude go before I take us off course here.
Yeah, I'm thinking for the most part, a lot of this is going to be an issue of efficacy more than anything else, because what matters when we start talking about accountability is literally what matters. If we're worried about what's going on with our students and how well they're going to do and succeed in the future rather than worrying about points or anything of that nature, then there's going to be more of a more closely looked at process. And the students stop being a means to an end and they become the end. And that makes a larger difference. Right now, a lot of times when we talk about accountability, our end is whether or not schools are getting enough points to not show up negatively in the newspaper, whether or not teachers are proving their worth. But to me, to prove your worth, that's an issue of efficacy and having students actually be successful rather than appear successful.
Very good point. And I think that relates to what Jenny said. And that leads me to ask, what needs to change in order to get to that point? Are we doing that right now? Is that what, when we talk about like what comes to mind in terms of accountability, is that what we're actually doing? Is that what our accountability measures, or what would need to change to get there?
So, Audrey, if I may, you know, again, I bring a business and industry voice to this. And, you know, I know that sometimes we're limited in what we can do with accountability. The legislature puts some mandates on us. But, you know, for business and industry to say to me, you all are calling these students post-secondary transition ready, and then they're coming to us, they're not. They're clearly not. They are deficient. And so there's a big disconnect in what business and industry sees as accountable, and they see who is ready to come work for them versus what a school says that these students are ready. And I think, unfortunately, we have a one and done mentality as far as, you know, the student, it's a checkbox. These students are ready. We got them a credential. It doesn't matter if it's a credential that really that student will actually utilize. We got them a credential and they are ready. So for instance, you know, to take one dual credit class and get a C in that class, that's not a hard lift for a school to do that. Versus then we have, you know, students are actually getting welding certificates or, you know, M&A certificates in the healthcare field. So there's a pretty big disconnect in what business and industry sees us as producing versus what a school is actually producing. So I would love for us to get away from that mindset of, again, the one and done. You know, I would love to see, I don't know if we're at this point, but a potential solution to this could be maybe a school can get more credit for more certificates and credentials that student actually achieves while they're in high school. So why couldn't we potentially look at that as a conversation of the more credentials a student gets and receives, the more credit a school would receive.
I really like that. And I think that it is a different way to think about things. It's very different than what we have now. And I don't think that's a completely impossible shift either. That's something that would be relatively simple to implement. It would just take a little bit of logistics to figure out. But especially since you said that that's coming from the field of business and industry, it's very important to consider.
I just want to say I completely agree with Mary. She made some very valid points, and I think especially in that one and done mindset. I think, if we're being honest, we have some schools out there that do look at it as just a checkbox, and once they've got students ready, then we actually had a school say, well, this content maybe isn't even necessary for this student because they've already passed their end of program assessment, or they've already earned an industry certification. And so it's messaging and understanding the value of stacking those credentials and building upon the student's knowledge. I think that we also have a message issue in the field. We often hear things, at least from business and industry, or even from teachers, that KDE lowers the bar in accountability. And that's where there's a disconnect in the message, is that KDE does not always make the decision. And actually, most of the time they don't when it comes to what's in our accountability system. And it seems year after year that there is legislated change that affects our accountability system, which also creates another problem in that if accountability is always changing, what do we have to compare it to from year to year? We need it to be the same for a while if we really want to be able to use the data to see what's affecting the change.
To kind of continue with that, as we're looking at mindset approach, you also have to realize, and I think everyone here in this meeting that deals with CTE is aware of this. Every time we talk about accountability, for the most part, we say career ready, we've gone transition ready, college and career ready, now post-secondary ready. But for the most part, accountability is looking at whether or not kids are ready to go to college. And understanding, one, college is not something everyone is going to do, but also understanding that looking at other areas where they aren't going to college is not a negative. We still have a great deal of people who don't understand what CTE is, but they understand a very old version of something called vocational school, which they see sometimes negatively. So we battle that on a regular basis. And when you look at what CTE offers, as Mary said, we deal with business and industry. It's not just carpenters and welders. We have engineering programs, nursing programs, math programs, business, and several other areas where students do go on to college. But to discount those areas and make the decision based solely on whether or not a student is going to be prepared to go to college is a huge mindset issue. And that's one of the things that has to be looked at. Each accountability measure has involved that, and CTE or career readiness has been kind of included, but the focus has still been on whether or not a student is going to go to college. And we have several schools. We get to go out to schools. Well, our kids aren't going to college. We don't have to worry about our kids are going to college. We don't need CTE. And that's such a wrong idea. That's a mindset issue that has to be addressed.
Yeah, thank you for that. And I've seen that conversation come up amongst students in my own school, students who got certifications, students who go to our CTE courses, and students who go off campus for Trailblazer Academies and things like that, where they say, why should I work on any of this? Because the school doesn't care what I'm doing, or the the state doesn't care what I'm doing, because it's not what's measured and it's not what's emphasized in our whole group conversations. I really quickly wanted to note what Zach said in the chat. The Kentucky Department of Education does a good job of accountability. That may seem surprising coming from a student. However, the main mistake that I see is communication. The education system, in tandem with schools, must communicate the importance of accountability in measuring outcomes, conduct, and curriculum. Students oftentimes don't try very hard on state tests because they don't understand the importance of accountability. And I think that is a really important note, because if we don't know what we're measuring, if it's just some big vague idea looming above us, then why should we contribute to it? And I've seen that conversation come up amongst my teachers before as well, and they'll just say, well, you have to do well on this test or else the school will shut down or I'll get fired or something like that. And we don't really know what's happening. So that communication piece does seem to be really, really important.
Audrey, if I could follow up with what Claude was saying, I agree with him 100%. And I think we're seeing a little bit of a shift more towards other areas besides just college. I know the legislatures have put in quite a bit of money for CTE, and I know the Kentucky Department of Education and state board members are very interested in career and technical education, and not just everyone going to college. And I'm seeing a little bit over the years. I'm seeing a little bit more of a shift towards that direction, and I think it's a positive one, and we need to really keep focusing on doing that. And when we talk about accountability, keep that in mind.
So I really tend to agree with that too. I think we don't go to college just for college. We go to college to further a career. So I think keeping that career mindedness first, and our interest, and then whatever it takes. It may be a 2-year degree, it may be a diploma, it may be a 4-year degree, it may be 8 years of school. Depends on what we want to do. So career focus or intent, and then next steps for that is what our accountability needs to kind of focus, or I feel like it needs to encourage.
Yeah, looking at that end goal, and that end goal isn't now, it's continuing throughout the student's life. Very important. Dr. Robinson, I saw you start to talk.
Yeah, I think that this is, a really important notion around this, the mindset idea. I mean, becoming a educated person now means that you are becoming an ever more expert learner. And what you learn has value to the greater good, the community, when you're able to put that learning to work for the benefit of the community as a part of the larger economy. And so, I'm thinking about, some of those old lessons in the history of education in America and so forth. And it was always about credentialing, but the credentialing had a lot to do with ranking, with sorting and selecting, and creating, a hierarchy in our society. Whereas now we have to be concerned about creating a very strong and broad foundation for the economic and social well-being of our community. So I don't want to get too philosophical here, but I think this mindset idea requires us to reflect on, the big shift from sorting and selecting to creating a vast array of opportunities for all students is really kind of huge. It's, I'll whisper, it's revolutionary, but it is exactly what we must do in order to have a hope for safe and secure and economically viable communities where folks don't have to invest in building walls and grates and stuff like that. They can invest in creating structures for engagement and inclusion. And, we're having this conversation, in the midst of a lot of dynamics that could encourage us to, rush to the deepest hole we can dig and pull the covers in over us. But we're trying to open it up, and it seems accountability moving in the direction of supporting stronger schools as a part of a stronger community as the allergies are. But anyway, I've said enough.
Thank you. I really like that part about supporting moving to support stronger schools and stronger communities, because I think that that really goes back to defining what we really mean by accountability, what it looks like. And we'll get more into that next week as well. But I really think that supporting is a very important part. And I think we've heard that come up throughout the conversation. Claude, I see that you're off mute. Did you want to say something?
I just had a broad yet general question. As we're having this conversation, it feels like we're on our way down a rabbit hole that's got no end. So as we talk about accountability mindset, whose mindset are we talking about? That of KBE, of the state, of our stakeholders? Where is it we're actually trying to go with this so we can kind of focus and narrow that some, because it's super broad, and we could talk for the next 3 months and be standing in the same place if we don't know where we're going.
I think that's a very good question. And I think it depends. And that's a terrible answer, I know. And Meredith will probably jump on here in just a second. But I do think that we're looking kind of at a broader audience. We're looking at the consumers of accountability, and whether that to you, that means students, teachers, parents, community members, the department. I really think it's the consumers of the accountability system. So what does that mean to them? What can that look like? In the end, we are a work group for the Kentucky Board of Education. So our audience that we'll directly be going back to is the full board, but really looking for them, what our stakeholders want to see, what the consumers of accountability want to see. Does anyone else have thoughts on that? Because that's where I'm coming from, but this isn't something that needs to be entirely structured. I do understand, oh, believe me, I understand a need for some defined audience, but I think that that's part of our goal today in particular, is to see where we need to go, what needs the most focus.
Well said,
Did
Audrey.
that answer? Yes.
So
Okay.
I just want to add to answer your question, Claude. So the hope after these 3 meetings is that we will be able to bring forward some recommendations for the board to consider to include in their call to action document that they will review and potentially approve for dissemination during the meeting in June, the regular meeting. So part of this is there's a lot of important work going on at the department around United We Learn and across Kentucky. We know that there's been a lot of important conversations around, what needs to change to allow our schools the opportunity to transform the student experience. And we know a big part of that continues to be our current assessment and accountability system. That is perceived as a barrier for our teachers who feel like they cannot be as innovative in their classrooms as they would like because of that sort of looming assessment and accountability hurdle, I guess we could say, that sort of looms at the end of each school year. But we also know that we are working currently with our CGSA grant in collaboration with the U.S. Department of Education to do some exploration over the next few years about what would be our preference for federal accountability. As has been referenced, we know that a lot of what we have in place is because it is mandated by the U.S. Department of Ed. And so we want to be able to communicate to them what would be a more flexible and supportive system. So not only do we want to understand the work that's going on and what we're hearing from the field as far as what needs to shift at the state level, we also want to be able to communicate back to US Ed what are the elements of a federal accountability system that seems to be more aligned with the values and priorities that have been identified by Kentuckians. So lots of purposes for this group. And I think, as Audrey said, there are lots of different audiences that we need to be considering as we think about our mindset and proposed structures around accountability. So I think that, like Audrey said, not the most straightforward answer. There's lots of reasons that we're here, but hopefully that helps provide a little bit of clarity.
And I do think it's important that we each come to this with our own backgrounds. That's why you all are here. That's why we have this structure the way that we have it, with a different variety of stakeholders is that we are covering all those backgrounds, things that we might not have considered in the first place. I do want to shout out what Zach said in the chat. I agree with Dr. Robinson. In Eastern Kentucky, public schools are a social safety net. Schools must be accountable to communities more than just academically. And I think that's a really important comment, because a lot of the time in some of our counties, the school is the largest employer, one of the largest employers. So what does that really mean in terms of accountability if we're looking at how the school functions in general? So very important. I think we can shift to a new question here. How can different stakeholders be held accountable? Kind of looking at what Zach put in the chat and that idea of schools must be accountable to communities more than just academically. How can different stakeholders be accountable? We're talking, students, teachers, parents, communities, businesses, the department, schools themselves. How can that look, or how should that look?
Audrey, I really like the way you described reciprocity when we were talking about the mindset question. And I'm thinking we collect a lot of data and we kind of report out on that data, but we often don't hold ourselves responsible and accountable for reflecting on that data as a community, as all the parties of interest coming to look at, well, what did the students say about their experience? Did they actually engage in learning, in a learning process that was provocative and exciting and challenging and all of, or did they, did they check in and check the box? And the business community, what do we have to say to them in order to get their voice made influential? I mean, what do they care about? I mean, a lot of times, I'm hearing that employers say, I want somebody who will show up ready to learn and really try and really put in and be accountable as an employee. It is so rather than just kind of collecting the data and reporting it as a report that may make news or may not make news, and then it floats out into some void out there. It's never really reflected on for, well, what can we learn from this in order to inform next steps? So, I'm thinking that we have to include policymakers in this as well, because I would just love to have some members of the legislature responsible for sitting in on a meeting with the local school leadership, looking at some of these data to understand, well, what do we do next? And maybe, inform their focus on things that really can make a difference in improving the outcomes. But so, I mean, it's like we collect a lot of data. I know that KBE collects a lot of data and we have a lot of surveys, but we don't seem to look at them as a representation of all the important facets of this thing that we want to get accomplished.
Yeah, I think that really circles back to communication, what we were talking about earlier. Being able to talk about that with other people, having that information be digestible, really asking, what does this mean to you in your stakeholder role? How can we improve on this, or what should we be improving on? Really important. Let's see. Zach has another comment in the chat. I don't know if there is a one size fits all answer to this. I have to think that Audrey was right talking about the way that schools should be centered around students' long-term success. If you translate that to communities, I think that schools need to educate students to be the most successful versions of themselves in their communities. I certainly believe that if schools are able to incentivize more students to stay in their communities after high school, that is what accountability would look like. Very interesting perspective. Anyone else on how different stakeholders can be held accountable, or what that should look like, or what that relationship could be? And Meredith put a related question in the chat. What does it mean for a top performing school to be held accountable for the experiences of students versus just the results? And what mindset shift needs to occur, or what needs to be prioritized to change the conversation from winners and losers to all school districts focusing on continuous improvement?
So I would like to point out, and I'm not the one that should talk about this, it's probably Carla, but we do a comprehensive local needs assessment as part of Perkins Accountability. And that group of folks are business and industry folks. It's college folks, it's other community members, and they come together and look at the data and look how all the different subgroups perform. And then they make decisions on on goals that they want to reach. And then once that's set in stone in their plan, they have to spend the Perkins allocations on those things that they value based on that data. And Carla can correct me if I've misstated that, but I feel like that goes into this conversation about bringing in community, because these groups are physically looking at that data and helping to make decisions on what they feel are important for that funding.
You did a good job, Tom. Not only though do we have business and industry there, we have all the special population groups that you think of, especially around all of the federal funding special population groups that are on all the federal legislation. They're represented there as well. So looking at that according to accountability and where things need to go, it's very different depending on what population or even what area you're looking at, and how they see this. But I know that, in going back to something that Mary said and building on Dr. Robinson's, that Dr. Robinson, I would love to see some of those legislators sit down with some of the business and industry folks that we sat down with to talk about what really is important. A lot of times in general conversation, they say we just want somebody to come to work. But when you really get down and push comes to shove and you're working with those larger groups, they want more than that. And they want to be able to say, okay, we understand what education is saying is important and why this is accountable. And I don't think necessarily we have that.
I really like that model of what you just discussed, like sitting down with the people that it's impacting, have them talk about it, and then report back and really be involved in that. And I think that'd be interesting to explore, especially in our conversation next week, what that could look like at a scaled level in our accountability structures, what that would look like for different stakeholder groups. I think that's a really important conversation to have, and the fact that it's already happening and we do have some way to go off of that is really valuable as well. Zach also put something else in the chat. Schools should be addressed by their ability to meet their students' needs. Gatton, Manual, Dunbar, and Craft may have students that are considered high achieving, but those schools should be measured by their ability to address the needs of their students. Schools that are traditionally low achieving should also be measured by their ability to address their students' needs. And I think that's that more comprehensive look at accountability. It's going beyond just the academics, like we said earlier. And I think that's something that out of our learning experiences group, would we want to see that measured? Would we want to be able to say, oh, this school is participating in this, they're taking risks, they're being innovative? Is that something that we would want to hold them accountable to? Or would we want them to just continue doing the same old, same old? So very important. Well, I think as we close out our discussion today, we can talk about, I'll find my one more question for us here, and then we'll wrap up. But what would a local accountability system mean to people? Not necessarily what it would have to look like, but what would that mean to you in your role? What would that have meant to you as a student, or if you were a teacher, or if you're a parent? What would that mean to you?
Several people have put addressing students' needs, which I would definitely agree with, but I think it goes back to something I mentioned earlier, especially if you're looking at the local level, which may be a little easier than doing from the state level, which is going from a sense of survival to a sense of efficacy, where it's not a matter of whether or not I'm hitting a goal to satisfy someone above me because they said so, as opposed to I'm hitting a goal because it matters to me. And that's at a teacher level. When I was in school, our teachers went through a lot, but they actually took care of all of the kids, even the ones they didn't like. Let's be Judgment Day honest. Students that drove them nuts, they still worked to make sure those kids survived and made well in school. Not because the state said you had to pass this test, not because they had to do something, it was because they wanted to make sure the kids did well and they could look back, and they instilled that mindset in me when I was in the classroom. It was more important for a kid to come back to me 5, 10 years later and let me see that they're doing something successful than worrying about whether or not they got an A or a C or a D in my class. So that sense of efficacy makes a great deal of difference. And that's where it builds from. And it's a lot easier when you do that and you look at more than one way to reach somewhere. Audrey, you mentioned that you're here in Frankfurt. I can easily ask the question of anybody on this call: how do you get from Frankfurt to Lexington? How do you get from Frankfurt to Hamburg? I can think of at least 5 different routes, and we'll all end up in the same place, but accountability says there's 1 or 2. And we have to look at what those other possible routes are. So that local sense of accountability, that local mindset has to include multiple options, not just the ones wherever the top happens to be, whether it's state, district, or individual school, or deciding what that goal is. It has to expand beyond that. And actually, Tom read a book. The book he mentioned reading, we did as an office, which is Ratchetdemic, that talks about just that. There are multiple ways of learning, multiple ways of showing success, not just I didn't get there the way you wanted me to get there. And I'm going to pick a little bit on possibly Audrey and Zach because they're high school kids. I don't know if they've ever watched, or some of the adults do too, but I'm a TV nut. If you've ever watched the television show Family Guy, and you remember the episode when Steve had to get the oranges up the stairs, did he get him up the way Stan wanted? No. Finally, Stan realized, does it matter how they got up the stairs, or does it matter that they got up the stairs? That's what we're talking about when we talk about the difference between the mindset of survival and that mindset of efficacy. I got it done. I did it without getting in trouble. I didn't do anything wrong or illegal. It's good. So that's what needs to really be addressed.
Yeah, and I really like that. Thinking back to the fall when we were talking about creative contributor with the state's portrait of a learner, I think that's where that element really shines through. Students, if they're having to do the one size fits all approach, that limits their creativity in all senses. But if you are a creative contributor, you're able to show off that I didn't get there the way that was lined out for me. I made my own way. It was messy and it was bumpy, but I got there and I enjoyed it and I learned something. So I think that creativity is something really important to include in our accountability conversation, because that really focuses on the individuality of the student and how their minds work and how they learn. So very important. Thank you. Zach put something in the chat here. As someone who will graduate from high school in a year, I think local accountability would look like my classmates and I being prepared for our futures as students in our county and the surrounding area. If a city school versus a county school face a discrepancy in college career readiness, there isn't accountability. And that's something. I come from an independent school district, just like Zach does. And I think that's something that's really important. Those conversations get left out a lot. We don't really understand what the difference between the two schools are, what resource allocation looks like based on accountability, but just different things like that. So anyone else before we wrap up for today on local accountability? Giving us some time to type in the chat if we're gonna do that. Okay, so hearing nothing, I think we can go ahead and move on to our next steps. So our next meeting will be next week on the 16th, Tuesday, at 9 o'clock, no, at 8 o'clock, sorry, Eastern time. Back here on a Zoom link, you'll see it in your calendar. I will be sending suggested readings out, but once again, if there's anything else that you know of, that you find, that you've already read, that you really enjoy about accountability structures, please send that my way. We would love to hear about that. So definitely recommend that. I will be sending those out, but our conversation will be about accountability structures. So we'll be talking about what we do here in Kentucky, what other places do, and what we would like to do. So those kinds of conversations, thinking beyond just the mindset and maybe some of the barriers or some of our ideals into what that would actually look like in practice. I'll follow up with you all probably tomorrow, but definitely before end of the day Thursday. And then I also have an exit slip for you, if I can get it copied. If I'm a future teacher, I'm going into an ed prep program next year. So I'm practicing my lovely teacher skills here with my exit slip. But I want to make sure that everybody felt heard in this conversation today. And if you didn't necessarily get the chance to contribute, or you had something else that you thought of later, definitely put it here. You have my email from where I emailed you all this information, so always feel free to reach out. And Meredith, do we have anything else that we need to do housekeeping wise to adjourn?
No, that was perfect. Great job, Audrey.
All right. Well, I hope everybody has a wonderful rest of the day, and I hope you continue thinking about accountability mindset. I know I will. So.